Good morning, John Q. This is the United States of Amnesia, broadcasting today as every day from somewhere between memory and forgetfulness. Today's headline, The Lion and the Sun. The other day we talked about the handwriting on the wall, about consequences, about Pandora's box, and about a phoenix rising from the ashes. A phoenix with a name, Persia. Not Iran, Persia. Because Iran is a country, Persia is a memory. And memory is where history becomes dangerous. You see, Americans think in election cycles, politicians think in polling numbers, television thinks in ratings, but civilizations think in centuries. And civilizations remember. Americans remember winning the Second World War. The British pined for the empire they lost. The Romans remember the glory of ancient Rome, and the Persians remember Persia. Now, before we talk about missiles, uranium sanctions, treaties, presidents, prime ministers, the Epstein files, or any of the other headlines that dominate the news, we need to take a brief detour into history. Because history is where civilizations keep their memory. And memory is where civilizations keep their dreams. Persia was not some regional power. Persia was the world. At its height, the Persian Empire stretched from Egypt to India, from the edge of Greece to the gates of Central Asia. It ruled nearly half the human beings on Earth. Now think about that for a moment. Nearly half. Now here's the thing about memory. History is what happened. Memory is about whether people choose never to forget. And civilizations do not remember themselves as they were. They remember themselves at their height, at their glory, at the moment the world bent around them. That's what empires remember. Not the years they spent on their knees, the years they spent on the throne. And when a civilization begins remembering the throne, it begins dreaming about it. That is why memory matters. That is why history matters, because the most dangerous question in the world is not, who are we? The most dangerous question in the world is, who were we? Because once a civilization answers that question, it immediately asks another. Who might we become again? And that is where the phoenix enters the story. Because a phoenix is not merely reborn, a phoenix remembers. It remembers it once ruled the sky, and once it remembers, it wants the sky back. And in Jewish memory, Persia is remembered for something else. A court where a decree was written to destroy them, a decree of annihilation, a decree remembered to this day, especially in Israel, especially by the men in charge. Because when people begin thinking about survival, history becomes very simple. They do not remember the hand that once helped them. They remember the hand that once threatened them, which brings us to the question nobody is asking. What does a civilization that once ruled nearly half the known world dream about when it begins to remember itself? Now let me be clear. When I say Persia, I do not mean the Iranian people. I do not mean the students. I do not mean the shopkeepers or the mothers praying their sons never see another war. I mean the men with the guns, the men with the missiles, the men with the prisons, the men with power. I mean the hard men of the regime. The men who view history not as a lesson, but as a weapon. The men who survived. And survival changes things. Because if you're one of those men, you do not see defeat, you see victory. You see the most powerful country on earth strike you and stop. You see your regime still standing. You see your oil beginning to flow again. You see money returning, reparations on the horizon. You see possibility, and victory does something dangerous. Victory teaches ambition, and ambition begins asking a totally different question. Not how powerful can we become, but what must we do to become Persia again? Because civilizations do not dream about becoming something new. They dream about becoming what they once were. The Romans dreamed of Rome. The British dreamed of empire. And the civilization that remembers ruling nearly half the world eventually begins asking the same question every empire asks. How do we return to greatness? How do we reclaim our place in history? How do we once again become the center around which others revolve? And that is where memory becomes lethal. Because once a civilization begins remembering the throne, it begins looking for a way back to it. And then comes the next question, not can we, but what must we do? And if you're one of the hard men of this regime, if you believe Persia is rising once again from the ash heap of history, sooner or later you begin asking a very dangerous question. How do we become the undisputed power of the Middle East? How do we become more than a nation? How do we become a civilization reborn? How do we become the power before which every other power bows? Because empires do not merely seek survival. They seek stature, prestige, leadership. They seek a place at the head of the table. And if you're looking at the Middle East through the eyes of this empire, you may conclude that there is one act, only one act, that would accomplish what generations only promised. From the sea to the sea. One act that would make you the champion of millions. One act that would forever change the balance of power. Whether that conclusion is right or wrong is not the point. The point is that empires calculate. And every empire calculates differently after victory, especially after defeating the most powerful nation on earth. And then comes the question the hard men of the regime are likely to ask, not who will stand against us, but who will stand with Israel? Who will bleed for Israel? Who will sacrifice for Israel? Who will risk their cities for Israel? Who will come? Because power is never measured by what you can do. Power is measured by what others are willing to do to stop you. And if you are looking out at the world through the eyes of ambition, memory, and empire, you may reach a very dangerous conclusion. You may see a whole world divided, a world exhausted, a world angry, a world where condemnations are plentiful and sacrifices rare. You may conclude that speeches will come, resolutions will come, emergency meetings will come, condemnations will come. But when the moment arrives, nobody will come, at least to the defense of Israel. At least that may be the conclusion they reach. And once a civilization begins to believe that nobody will come, history enters a very dark room, because the question is no longer can we. The question becomes what is stopping us. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we will pick up next time. Because next time we will stop looking through Persian eyes. We will look through the eyes of the Israelis. Next time, we will ask what happens when a nation founded on one phrase, never again, begins making its own calculation. A word to the wise. Truth is virtue, amnesia is sin. Remember.